Ta-da.
Ta-da! Do we get theme music?
No,
You
unfortunately.
don't have theme music yet?
No, not yet.
Fix it.
I haven't decided. Okay. But anyways, hello everybody and welcome to tonight's live on Cracking Open a Cold One with your host Doug Graves, the friendly neighborhood necromancer, and joined with us this evening is a special guest, Bozanfe Bonongan, also known as Houngan Matt.
Howdy.
Howdy. From Societe Nago?
Mhm.
For before we get into tonight's topic, would you kindly introduce us to yourself?
Well, I mean, as you said, my name is Houngan. No, my name is Matt. Houngan Matt is my title. Houngan's our word for male priest. My full initiate name is Bozanfe Bonongan. Technically, it's Bozanfe Bonongan Dagimin Minfo. Yeah, our titles go on, but I am an Asogwe level initiate in Haitian Vodou. Asogwe is kind of senior clergy. We can probably sort of cycle back to that later. But I have been Kanzo, or initiated to that level, for 13 years now. Societe Nago, our lineage is based in Boston and a town in the south coast of Haiti called Jacmel.
Okay. And we have a branch in America, and there's one in Haiti, which is the original.
Yeah, but well, our head of house is named Marie Maud Evans, or Antiola Bomambo is her name within Vodou. She owns the property in the temple in Jacmel, but lives most of the year in Boston, Massachusetts, and has her temple there. We're gradually expanding. I've got a temple that we're building here in Louisiana. Our brother Tyler has one that he's building in Georgia. Our sister Portia does a lot of temple activities, mostly through dance classes in the San Francisco area. So like we're gradually kind of, I feel like Pinky in the Brain. Soon we will take over the world. But we're kind of getting there. We're getting little orbital spots. But one of the strong things for Haitian Vodou specifically is it's very much a family-based and family-oriented tradition. So like all of these different orbital spots, none of them are, I'm losing the word that I wanted to say. They're not alone. They're not isolated. They're not, I was about to say self-sufficient. That's the wrong idea. It's very much a single network as opposed to go over here and you never have to talk to the people over there.
Okay.
So we very much think of like the extension of the house in the main temple in Jacmel in Haiti. Like these are our family members and folks that we talk to all the time. There's a initiates WhatsApp group that we're constantly like blipping things off in English and Creole. So it's one family with a couple different places to stay.
Okay, pretty cool. No. So like I guess we can just dive into the topic. Well, actually, before we even go into the Loire, would you be able to talk about like what Haitian Voodoo is as a religion as well as a spiritual tradition?
Okay, so the problem is to give a really good answer, it's going to sound complicated, or it should say it's going to sound more complicated than it actually is. Technically, when it comes down to it, Haitian Vodou is an outsider appellation and a word used to describe something that by its nature in that title doesn't actually exist. What's weird is like on the ground in Haiti, we're talking about a religious tradition that has no name. It's never needed one. So it's an outside thing to look at it and say, well, that's Haitian Voodoo. Mostly because we're trying to give it a counterpoint to be like, well, we might understand Dominican Vodou, or it's kind of like Santeria, so let's talk about, well, the Haitians do it this way. The religious tradition that's there is a Venn diagram-like series of overlapping bubbles where different regions of the country have a slightly different way of working with a particular type of spirit being. Most of them are inherited from the different kingdoms in West Africa that were the sources of enslaved people that were brought over to the New World.
Mhm.
Out of that, a couple particular ethnic groups and nation states had either a higher percentage of imported slaves or a philosophy that was very easy to glue other religions and traditions to. Are you with me so far? So,
Yes.
like, if we look at like current day in Haiti, what the folks in the north of the country versus the folks in the south of the country are doing are fairly startlingly different traditions. Like, our house is very southern. Jacmel is a coffee port right in the lower kind of corner. Port-au-Prince is here, Jacmel's down here. Um, and we're classically a very southern lineage. But if you look at like famous places in the north of the country, like the Great Lacus of Souvenance, Sucre, and Bajo, what they're doing is Vodou, but it's a very different practice from what we have. Likewise, there's a religious tradition called Makaya throughout parts of the island. There's secret societies like Bizango, Sampuel. Like, all of these are spirit-driven traditions and lineages that work with a type of being that follows down the lineage path.
Mhm.
There's overlap in that the style, the salutes, the protocols, basically the technology is largely shared in common. Somebody from a couple towns away can come to our temple and see your rite. Some things might be a little bit different, but they're going to be able to join in enough because of the similarities.
Oh, okay.
But largely, it's, I suppose if you were to think of like university fraternities,
Okay.
what the Kappas are doing is different from what the Deltas are doing, but everyone can look at it and say, well, it's all the Greek system. And there's enough commonalities of like maybe the structure or the bylaws of how they bring in new members, how they initiate new members, what the council meetings do, how many people does it take to make a quorum, all those things might be close to identical throughout the network of different frats. But a delta is always going to recognize a delta and be like, yeah, same people, because it doesn't matter the university that that frat's attached to. The society is the family.
Gotcha. Okay.
Vodou is a lot like that. Does that make sense? I mean, it's a little bit windy to give like the real answer.
Well, I mean, voodoo is complicated, right? Once you get down to the nitty gritty. So, I mean, definitely like, you know, you can't really give it a single sentence, right?
It's kind of like saying what's Native American or First Nation spirituality.
Hmm.
I think that like more folks, especially in our two countries, are more familiar with Native Americans and First Nations people than they might be with folks of African descent in a foreign country that's like not as commonly border shared. Um, it's very easy for things in publication or for like new age spiritual shops or whatever to sort of dismiss or think that they're being inclusive when they're like, well, this is Native American, use sage. But it's like, well, what kingdom, what tribe, what nation, where are they in their history, what contact did they have, do they even come from a part of the world where sage grows? Like, the notion to dismiss and diminutize things by saying, well, it's just Native American, is like saying, well, it's just voodoo. But there are so many different aspects of what style, what is it, what kind. On the ground in Haiti, I mean, as I said, we don't really even have a name. The notion of like believers as what we might say Vaudouisants, or people within Vodou, that's kind of the closest we get. But if you were to ask somebody, what's your faith? More than likely, they're either going to say Catholic or they'll say, I serve. Either I serve the ancestors, I serve the spirits. They might use a particular title for a type of like the memory metaplane of what we conceptualize Africa. They might say Guinea, like Msevi Guinea, I serve Guinea.
Okay.
But that's more of like a verb of what you do than it is the name of who are your in people. That we don't really have because everyone in theory is part of it.
Okay. I mean, would they use the older terms from like back back in Africa to kind of describe what?
Sort of. I mean, some of it, that's where we start getting into the real technical specifics. Like, when I said that certain populations that either had a greater percentage of the people that were brought to Haiti, or for some reason their philosophy was easier to bind things into, what we're actually looking at is protocols and sort of physical actions referred to as rites, R-I-T-E, where you have like rite Rada, rite Petuo. Those are like when someone is calling in a spirit, if that spirit comes from particular nations in origin, then your choreography, how you behave to call them into the temple, is based on specific protocols that are those rites. A Rada spirit is called in a different way than a Petuo spirit is. But when you get behind it, like Rada, the word is a corruption of the name of a city in Benin called Alada. That was one of the major ports through which people were sold.
Mhm.
So Rada, the rite, implies most of those spirits in origin come from Benin, Mali, Cameroon, like that region north of Nigeria.
Okay.
What we consider Petuo, largely the tech behind it is Congo in origin. In some way, shape, or form. There's a lot of different nations around the Congo basin, and Congo by itself is also a separate rite. But like, we're looking at folks that would be the equivalent of saying, well, you've got one Native American tribe from Massachusetts, but you've got another like First Nations tribe from Vancouver.
Mm.
The distance in between Benin to the south of Congo and like Angola, it's a very different group of people, a very different philosophy, and a very different way of working with their spirits. Each of those rites implies like where in West Africa those spirits came from.
Gotcha. Okay.
But like another sort of key difference when we're looking at like other diasporic religions, meaning African religions in the New World, places like Cuba, the ethnic groups largely stayed separate. There's some bleed over, there's some overlap, there's some cultural assimilation, but the folks that spoke the Yoruba language were able to maintain themselves as a tradition now called Lukumi or Santeria. The folks of Congo origin were able to maintain themselves as a tradition called Palo. Arara, very similar to Rada. Like the ethnic groups in Cuba stayed somewhat distinct and kept their religions for their in-groups. Haiti's key difference is we had the revolution.
Okay.
So it's the only nation ever to birth itself through slave revolt, successfully create an independent nation state. When they kicked the French off the island and kicked the Vatican off too, I think there was sort of a realization of, well, we're not going to go back home now. We can't get back to our ancestral lands. What are we going to do? We are Creoles now. We have to be that sort of nascent Haitian identity. The lines between, all right, you guys are Fon, we're Kita, you guys are Amin, you guys are Congolese, stay over there, wasn't really a luxury that could be afforded anymore. So to create a nation identity of like, we're now Haitians, they saved and blended all of the different religious traditions that they had brought to the island into one practice instead of separates like you see in Cuba with those traditions, or like Brazil with like Kimbanda, Mbanda, Candomblé, all the different things. In Haiti, the shift was, well, the Rada are going to be this part, the Petuo are going to be this part, but it's one priesthood, or at least it's one series of lineages.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
I think another sort of key difference that a lot of folks don't realize when we're talking about us as a religion is like even these particular spirits, they're not deities. They're not like, you can't really flip open a book and say, well, this sort of new age book with the crescent moon on the cover says, well, if I'm doing a love spell, let me find who's a good love deity that I want to work with. Oh, bink, I'm going to work with that one. Our spirits are literally spirits, or I guess you could call them angels. It's a being in between human and divine. But the act of serving them, or the act of giving them attention and worship and prayer on their behalf and sacrificial energy, makes them stronger. It's literally how we feed them. But those spirits will stay with a particular community. We're taking care of them, we feed them, they're taking care of us. They exchange services with us in exchange for that food. So one of the key differences, like especially when we get into issues of cultural appropriation, we tend to be pretty loud about it. Like, put that down, that's not for you. Because if someone outside that bubble doesn't have an introduction to that spirit, they're not part of the community that spirit's expecting food from.
Gotcha.
So it's even trickier. Like, that's again why I'm like, we're technically a religion without a name, because technically we're also not really a religion. We're a series of practices and a series of contracts and pacts we've made with spirits over time. But that's why, like, if you ask most folks in the temples, what's your religion? They're probably going to say Catholic, because the two kind of exist in symbiosis.
Okay. Gotcha.
Told you, complicated and weird.
Well, I mean, unique, so I mean, definitely.
As part of the idea of all of these different sort of nation states coming together to become one people, I think that there's also like the components of what people or what the peoples had been exposed to through time. We've got Congo spirits, but Congo as a country or as a nation was Catholicized in 1491. So hundreds of years before folks were being taken from the Congo and put as slaves elsewhere, Catholicism was one of the things that they already had.
Just going off of tangent here, like Congo right now is a country, but wasn't the Congo referred to as a kingdom in a region much larger than the country itself, though?
Yes, and has sort of splintered into. I don't even think Angola is called Angola anymore. I believe its name's changed, but now there's like the Democratic Republic of the Congo. When we say like Congo in terms of ancient West Africa, we're largely referring to the basin of the Congo River, with a whole bunch of different ethnic groups, like Bantu speaker. Like, there's many kingdoms, many nations make up that region. So it's also worth saying, like, actually a great example north of the Congo, when we say the word Nago, perfect example. Many of the terms that we use to represent or speak about the nations of people in West Africa are kind of frozen at the point of colonialism, or the colonial experience, Haiti, getting all of these people. We use the word Nago to describe people from 8 ethnic groups, or 8 nations, that got together later to say, hey, we all speak this one language. Can we be known by the name of this language? Yoruba. So like when we say Nacion Nago or Right Nago, the tech for calling those spirits, we're using an older term that the actual folks in West Africa no longer use to self-identify.
Oh, okay.
Similar with Congo. Like, we're talking about how things were in the 1780s, when Africa has significantly changed and politics of fluctuations and nations and borders, and things are very different now in Africa than they are from when our spirits were brought to us.
Okay.
That's actually, remember earlier when I was talking about Guinea, and like we might say, I serve Guinea. If you're familiar with Tolkien's Silmarillion, this is a really weird tangent to go on, but it makes sense. In his universe, the way he crafted it, Middle-earth was created to be flat. All of this stuff happens, the First Age and Morgoth and wars and elves and all this stuff. But in the process, the world is broken, reshaped to be round, and the island that used to be in the west that the elves could go home to is now taken out of the circles of the world. So the elves have a straight sail. When they want to leave this world, they go straight and they go to Elven home, where normal mortals cannot go. It's a really weird way to look at it, but Vodou has a really similar feel about our like metaplane of the memory of ancestral Africa, where our spirits come from, where our spirits go to go home. When we say Guinea, Guinea is basically like the golden age of these West African nations, from period before the world was broken by slavery. The process of the Haitian Revolution, the ceremonies that caused it, the energy of all the blood that soaked into that land, effectively, one of the things that happened was that Guinea, the philosophy, and Africa, the dirt, were sort of divided. We had to take the roots, we had to take the energy of where these peoples were in West Africa and make them part of Haiti. So for us, it's like the astral double, if you will, or the spiritual shadow of those lands had to be brought to where people could access it, because they were not able to go back and forth from Haiti, literally a nation that just revolted, to West Africa. So that Guinea became its own sort of, like, I like the idea of the word metaplane. It's its own thing. It's where these spirits come from. It's where the changes were enacted, but it's also like a cultural memory of how ideal the world could be or used to be.
Okay. So with a comparison, well, maybe not, people might not know the Silmarillion, can't say this name. Tolkien's, I guess, work of the creation.
Silmarillion.
But would it be closer to be something like a spiritual Jerusalem, sort of? Like
Kinda. Like, I suppose Jerusalem's tricky because there are a lot of traditions that maintain it as theirs that don't agree with each other. I suppose if we were to sort of take a sidestep and look at like what explanations our cultures have been given of what's been happening in the indigenous folks in Australia, where what we know of what get called song lines are historical modes of travel from one place to another, where different events happened in places that the events were memorialized in songs. You can, if you know the keys, if you know the energies involved and you know the music, you can use the song to guide a map through the continent from famous location where things occurred to the next one in line. Shaka, when the walls fell, moves on to the next one. If anything ever happened to the indigenous folks of Australia and they were relocated forcibly to another place, then the energy overlaying the physical map of those song lines would probably be remembered and those songs would be transmitted, but without the geography that it was tied to, it would become very much an astral echo. The more energy given to it, just like feeding a spirit, you make the spirit stronger. Feeding the memory, you make the memory stronger. It is one big spirit. So if you rip away these people's connection to ancestral Africa and energetically recreate ancestral Africa within them and around them as an astral shallow, if you will, or a separate place that's not the immediate mirror energy of where they are, but it's a place their spirits can bridge, then they have something that they've brought with them that's no longer part of what it came from. That's Guinea in comparison to Africa. And it's one of the reasons why, like, the traditions that exist in Haiti now are no longer really mutually transliteratable, even to the traditions that continue that are some of our points of origin.
Gotcha.
Like Ifa or Isheshe in Nigeria has evolved over the same amount of time that we have evolved, where our Nago people that were taken from what's now Nigeria took their spirits, took their powers, they brought their saints and angels with them. But what those became in time through their community can no longer really be equated to what's been continuing in Nigeria through that same period of time. So what we have as Ogu, or the different Ogus in that group of spirits, even as an Asogwe, I would not be able to go to an Isheshe environment and say, well, I'm a priest of Ogun, because to both of our traditions, I'm not. Even if that's the Orisha that became the Loa over time, what we've got evolved separately from what they have. Similarly, like, you couldn't say a Romanesh and a Portuguese speaker would potentially have a very difficult time communicating, even though both languages used to be Latin. time has passed.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I suppose if you look at it for the tree allegory, it's from the same
It's a
tree,
different branch.
right? It's not
Yeah.
the same branch, but still part of something.
Right. And also, like, the spirits, when we say their names or we talk about Loa and you see the name in public somewhere, they're not deities. It's not a single name that encapsulates everything. Like, Ogu is a complex of hundreds of spirits. And even those are like, each lineage has their own bubble and their own version and their own manifestation. And those can be inherited and passed on or bought or taken away. We're not looking at something like...
I'm guessing like maybe angelic hierarchies.
Similar, but like the comparison I was going to try to make, I was looking for a world religion or an old world religion where you might find a name that is simply everyone who calls this name knows this being.
Oh.
But the problem is they don't actually even exist. Like, looking at Roman state religion, Diana of Ephesus and Diana Nemorensis were two different women. They're not a single Diana. Like, what we have for our Loa names, it's not... Your Erzilifreda might be different from my Erzilifreda, might be different from the Erzilifreda from that mountaintop over there. There's no single way of approach that a single name is going to give you understanding or power over a spirit. So when we talk about, like, it's very often we'll get hit with the question of like, well, you guys came from Nigeria, Benin, Congo, whatever. Why is your Ogu different from their Ogun? And it's like, because the classification of spirits that gets called an Ogu that was brought with the folks that came to Haiti went with them, while the ones that were with the people that were not purchased and brought over stayed where it was. There's a similarity of name, but there's no transliteratability of the individual entities any more than there would be, like, the notion of just because I can borrow $20 from my mother, I can't walk up to your mother and just say, well, you're just a mom. Where's my cash? If I were to do that to your mother, I think that reaction would be quite harsh. Who are you?
Yeah, true.
So, I mean, even when you're seeing written things about the practices, the traditions, and the religions, whoever's writing about it, the researcher or the practitioner, is writing about the spirits of the community they could access and those experiences. But it can't imply that that's a universality of every spirit that goes by that name throughout the entirety of the tradition umbrella.
I mean, like, to just apply that universality kind of betrays the nature of those spirits. Not
Well,
Ogu, but like the whole concept or the whole corpus of Loa, right?
and it shows a colonial attitude in much the same way as the example we used before of dismissing maybe like Algonquin versus like Salish as, well, it's just Native American, as though that's an umbrella that describes anything.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the same with the spirits. Regions, nation of origin, which house, which family is transmitting this energy, who inherited what. Like, when you see something in print, you can't ever take like one of these books, even if it was anthropological, and translate it into, I'm going to make this happen at my home altar, without being a part of the family that that author was studying.
Mm-hmm.
Because that author is going to, like, if you've got an author studying something happening in Okap versus Jérémie or Jacmel, well, what they're looking at is actually going to be subtly different. And that will creep up in the writings because it's the differences between houses and lineages.
Mm-hmm.
Colors are a great one. You'll see some people that'll say, well, salute Legba in red and black. Another house says salute Legba in yellow and purple. Well, yellow and purple is not red and black. Who's right? The thing is, they both are for their group. That spirit that's traveled with that family answers to a particular energetic set of keys. Without being part of that family, those keys are useless. But if you're part of that family, my family's keys are useless to you. Because there's no There's no central authority that dictates what the rest of us do.
Yeah, definitely. But when you say keys, do you mean like initiation? Like
Well,
like
initiation is, remember I said that we're family based.
yeah.
There are parts of Haiti in which the tradition is genetic. If you are not born to the family or you do not marry in, this is absolutely useless to you because you will never be part of the family.
Mhm.
There are other parts of Haiti where their tradition has adapted forms of initiation where you can bring people into the spiritual family. The complex of houses referred to as the Asson lineages, because of the tool that we carry, are a great example. Asson lines have an initiation technology called Kanzo that can bring anybody in. If the spirits say they want you, you go through Kanzo, you can be a priest in this group. But what the initiations are, or the inheritances for those families that require those, are a ritualized introduction or empowerment to the spirits that travel with that family.
And that family only.
Correct.
Okay.
So now again, there is overlap. I have visited other houses when they were doing their ceremonies. They recognized me as an initiate, ritually gave me a way to salute their spirits, like an invite saying, "You're a priest too, you are welcome. Please come join in." And I was able to call Loa in their temple. But when I say keys, like the initiation, it gives you a formal introduction to the spirits that travel with that group. And in theory, that group's duty then is to teach you how to work with their family spirits. There are ritualized invocations. There's a series of ritual designs called veve. That's another one. If you see a veve in print, if it's not veve that your lineage handed to you, it is useless, utterly useless. They are not art. They can be, but they're not like, you're not going to paint a veve on a wall and expect a spirit to answer you. Even I don't do that. There's a way these work. But the veve, the invocations, we call it langage. What colors that spirit takes for us, what liqueurs, what offerings, what all of those things are keys in a way that it's like, if you know what station to dial on the radio and what frequency to tune your dial to, provided you've got the right form of current hitting that receiver and the right station on the radio, you're going to hear the music that DJ is broadcasting. As long as you know what those keys are, you can put them together and access the energy that those keys open. If it likes you. They're also like, these are not mere wavelengths. Like, they have personalities, they have wants, they have agendas. They will be closer to certain people than others. We call that your court, or the spirits that are your esco, the ones that travel with you, are the ones that are willing to put up with your stuff. I have spirits that are my go-tos that I'm going to talk to on the regular, versus spirits that look at me and they're like, what hi, can I help you? Gotcha. Everyone's going to have some that they're closer to, even initiates. But what the initiations do is, as a priest, they expand the spirits that you've got naturally. They introduce you to the ones that you don't. Your lineage teaches you how to work with even the ones that are not close to you. Because as an example, like say you, Doug, were under attack by one spirit that doesn't really talk to me, but you came to me for help, recognizing there was a spiritual problem. I have to be able to intercede with that spirit on your behalf, even if they're not one that I talk to regularly. So there are protocols to do that. There's a lot more to the initiations. Like, I know that's a really sort of gross oversimplification, but I worry that if I were to fill in all the blanks, we would be here till midnight.
Definitely.
But
no, I mean, there's a lot to it, and it's much more involved than people realize. So,
well, because it's a real religion, and it's funny. It's like, especially when we're talking about issues of outsiders looking in or outsiders taking things from the inside. There's a weirdness with the modern internet where everyone's going to understand you're not going to run up to the steps of a cathedral, jump on the altar and say, but I'm qualified to give Mass. Or let me give the bread out. Because people are going to understand Roman Catholic priests are trained and go through seminary. Why can't these people respect religions that are African in origin? They're not going to jump up and take the Eucharist and start giving it out. But they're going to say, well, I dance with Freda because they read something pretty online.
Goodness.
But that's the thing. Like the religions are hugely complicated. Hugely complicated. Every religion, when it comes down to it, is hugely complicated. But we are a system or an interlocked network of faiths with priests, ordinations, training protocols, and a community that raises a priest up to say, that's the person we've taught to take care of us. It's not intuited. Spirits don't come to you and say, well, you're more special than 9.5 million Black people. Like, there's a way that this is done and ways that it's not.
I mean,
there's like within initiates, if someone were to ask me a specific ritually coded way of asking who initiated you and where, I am duty bound to say, I am child of Marie Maud Evans, Antiola Bomambo. I was made in this year. I was made in this town. These people were witness. There's details I have to give when asked because I have to be able to prove that I was made an initiate correctly. Once that happens, it's like, okay, we recognize this person knows their stuff. That's cool. We can work with them. We can not, whatever, but they're real in a way that Sister Rainbow Moonbeam, who cracked open a book with a crescent moon on the cover that had a spell to do like voodoo love magic with this spirit, and I did this with my candle, and yeah, my boyfriend dumped me, but I'm still going to tell people I worked with that spirit. None of that is real. None of that is the religion. None of that is the traditions, whether you call it a religion or not.
I mean,
but it gets really, really complicated fast. Like, this is something, our initiations give you license to learn what that rank can hold. Mm-hmm. Because it is a tradition of so much information, no single head can hold it all.
Oh. No.
It's a community practice. You will never stop learning. You'll never stop getting all of these details and songs and langage and practice. It never stops.
And I think we discussed this too, that no one can ever hope to meet every single Loa that exists, right?
Oh my God, no. Why would you want to? You got to have a life. Like, your time's got to go somewhere. I guess, like, a good way of putting it is the book's not really going to be handy to anyone that's not Francophone or not able to read French. And not all of the words have easy translations, but there's a book called Les Esprits de Vodou Haïtien by, I think Ackerman is the editor's name that I can remember. This is off the top of my head. But Les Esprits de Vodou Haïtien is this book of like a listing of as many spirits as these people could track down.
Oh, wow.
From different lineages and different houses. And it's got a breakdown of basic categories like the Bosus, the Brigittes, the Fredas, the Dantors, the stuff. But even there, like, we found 11,000 spirit names. And we know there's more out there. Like, each envelope of spirits that travel with the particular lineage that hands down the introductions to work with them tends to be one particular community. But no community is going to work with all of those spirits or even think that they have the right or the time to. There's no real need to. Like, none of us have a monopoly on the spirit world. We just have an introduction to the spirits that our bubble travels with. And the folks that are willing to do services or work on our behalf because we have been introduced to them the right way.
Gotcha.
But again, like, even like when I was talking about the Veve, if you get a copy of that Ackerman book, it's amazing if you can read it. Not everyone's Francophone. But it's not going to put practical, usable information in someone's hand if their lineage does not have the spirit that's being written about. Because it'll give you a cursory overview. You might have a better understanding of, oh, that's who that spirit is to those people. But without the specific ritual way of bringing a spirit into the lineage, there's no connection there. We have no right to talk to them.
Gotcha. Well, I mean, yeah, it makes it for less complications, at least when it comes to interacting with spirit anyway, because now you're just focused on those specific ones that you have been introduced to.
Bingo.
But
Well,
I
an
mean,
Assault, like within the Assault lineages, the rattle itself is a tool of control. It's a tool of command. And it has protocols by which I can actually communicate with a spirit that I don't have in my own lineage.
oh, okay.
Assault has its own protocols and its own usage. But that does not give me a power of command over that entity. Just because I have an Assault does not mean that that spirit's suddenly going to work for me. It just gives me a way to force a moment of like, hey, I said, please talk to me. And then communication can begin. Or figuring out what an issue is that they might have with someone that I represent as a community elder.
Okay.
So Assault has its own, again, I keep referring to these as Venn diagrams or series of bubbles, because there's a lot of those weird overlaps. Yeah, technically I can't talk to their spirits if I'm not part of their lineage, but the Assault allows me access to at least ask them certain questions about what I can do. Even though they're not necessarily gonna do what I say, it just opens up a negotiation.
So it's kind of more like a README, like on the file, not being able to edit, just just view, sort of thing.
Well, I mean, it's more like I could. Let's talk Twitter for a second. Celebrities that can prove that they're a celebrity can have a blue check mark next to their name. Everyone's writing to these people. Everyone's going to be like, oh my God, I love you. When are you going to write back to me? And they're never going to. These people are not going to check their email. Assault gives me a way to break through and send something that's going to show up on their phone as a text message. Assault gives me a way of like, hey, just so you know, I got a question for you, and they're going to see it. More than likely, they'll reply, but they're not willing to suddenly make me their best friend. I don't know them. They're not going to come over for tea, but they'll answer a particular question in crisis. I can be an agent that represents another movie studio.
Okay.
So they might be willing to talk, they might not. But it gives me a little bit extra of an in, just not the power of command. They don't work for me, but they'll hear me out.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm.
Whereas the spirits that travel within our communities, the way that our service works, the way that we maintain them as beloved elders and parts of the community that just don't have a body, they're more likely to do what I ask as long as what I'm asking agrees with their ethos. If I'm not abusing them, they have no reason to be angry at me for asking a favor. Some of them will simply do for me. All I need to do is talk about, hey, this client needs this. What are we going to do? Some of them I might need to actually work for and pay them. The money that comes to me from my clients, a lot of that goes back to my spirits. There are certain folks that can be transactional. There are certain folks that will volunteer help. But those folks that are parts of lineages that I don't even have an in, they have no, if I were to try to command one of them, the reaction would be very bad. Because I don't have the right to.
I expect it.
But that's the thing about, if I were to just ask your mom, hey, you're just a mom, give me money, I need to borrow $20. Yeah, that would fly like a lead balloon.
Definitely.
Yeah. Try that to my mother, that lead balloon would be the Hindenburg. It would be really, really bad.
Mm-hmm. I can only imagine. But yeah, going back to a previous topic that we were discussing, within Haitian voodoo, there are three main groups that do that.
Well, there are three main rites.
Rights. Okay.
And that's also there's actually a lot more than three in terms of main trunks, but not every lineage has them. Okay. So almost all will have the ideas of Rite Rada, also referred to sometimes as right Yan Valu because of the name of the drum rhythm. Peto and Gede. There are other rites, like Bizango is both a system of secret societies as well as a rite. Rite Bizango is its own thing.
Okay.
Rite Makaya. Makaya is a wholly separate religious system. Some overlap, not all do. But Rite Makaya, some lineages have it, some do not.
Okay.
So I think when we tend to think of the three, we're looking at folks like Herskowitz, Korlander, Maya Deren, a lot of the early academics that in the 1920s through 1940s were studying what was happening in Haiti. They were looking at lineages that allowed them to be there for their rituals. So when they say these are the big rites, what they're writing about is the big rites of a house that allowed them to watch.
Gotcha.
So like my lineage, mine basically stops at Peto. That's about as hot as we get. We're a type of lineage that we've made particular vows to stop at certain things. So we have Rada, Peto, Nago, Gede. But we don't have Rite Makaya, we don't have Rite Bizango or Sampuel or those other systems because our lineage and theirs just never intermarried. We didn't inherit those.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm.
Arguably, as we said before, those come from largely different parts of Haiti, where Rada is Alada, that's the northwest, that's Benin, Mali zone. Nago, largely Nigerian now. Peto, largely Congo, even though we also have Right Congo, which is a separate system. Gede is the other interesting one, and I'm sorry for what's going to sound like a tangent. When an ethnic group called the Fon Ngwe moved into what's now Benin and conquered the people that were there before, they did to them the same things that the Aryans did to the Dravidians when they conquered their parts of India. They created a caste system by which the wealthy and the colonizers were higher caste than the colonized. And those people, the colonized, became dispossessed, relegated to you deal with the filthy things, like you take care of the dead things and the grave digging, and you deal with the bodies because our people don't do that. And the name of that ethnic group was the Gedevi. So like when we're looking at the different classifications or envelopes of spirits within that which gets called Vodou, most of them are nations because it says where they came from. It's their nation of origin. But Gede, and the drum rhythm for them is called Banda, so you'll very often hear that as right Banda. But the Gede are family Gede, not nation. Because way back in the midst of history, their nation was dispossessed and taken away from them.
Gotcha.
So there's a lot of memories that we maintain like that are really subtle. But so those are largely going to be the three main trunks. Rada, Peto, Gede. Rada is conceptualized as spirits that are very air, very water. Water is always a part of their service. Water is the vehicle by which their spirits travel. Very stately and very clean. Peto and Southwest African energies tend to be conceptualized as spirits of fire. It's a very different energy. Volatile. You have to be careful. You can cook on it or it can nuke you. They're not as forgiving as the air and water. They're not as intellectual as the air and water. They're not as understanding of beginners. They work by contract. They're harsh. They're hot. Not violent necessarily, not evil, just risky. But it comes with a different protocol of technologies. Whereas water's not going to be part of their salute at all. Why would you call a spirit of fire with a cup of water? You just don't do it. The Gede, being the dead, largely have a very different energy. Most of the Rada and Peto and Naga, all of those, few among them were ever people. Many, many, many of them are a spirit of a natural force that over time and generations of work was civilized, brought to understand how people behave, what people can offer them. The Gede were people. All of those spirits were physically in a body at one point in time and remember what it's like to be in one. So like their understanding of humanity and their way of working with people are very different from the spirit that used to be that of a giant rock.
Mm.
Problem is, when we sort of say like, even the idea of the three trunks in comparison to like, yeah, we don't have Makaya or Bozanfe. Each of those different protocols encapsulates a whole bunch of different nations worth of spirits, classifications worth of spirits. Not all of that is a neat and tidy science either. Like, yet let's use a group of spirits called the Bozou as an example. Bozou is the French word for hunchback.
Oh.
And that sort of implies, like Quasimodo le Bozou, Quasimodo the hunchback.
Okay.
Bozou as a spirit group stem from an ancient Beninois idea of if a child was born misshapen, unlike the Romans, who would expose that child at birth and leave them to die, the folks in Benin, in this part of Benin, saw that child as inherently holy, and it took the entire community to raise them up. Out of that grows a group of spirits called the Bozou, but nowadays the Bozou manifest as though they're bulls, minotaurs. Those bumps on the head that were once a misshaping became a horn. But the group of spirits known as Bozou straddle the Rada and the Petro. They're a separate group, but we call them twice, because some of them that are at the Rada end respond to Rada technology. Some of them that are at the angry Petro end respond to a Petro style. But the Bozous as a group belong to themselves. They are neither right Rada or Petro. We can simply call them using two different ideas.
Gotcha. Okay.
Does that make sense? So it's like, we've got this bubble over here can touch down over here or over there. But it by itself is self-contained.
Okay. But there are a lot of groupings like that, though, right?
Absolutely. Like, dozens. The Simbis are their own like that. There are Rada and Simbis. There are Petro and Simbis. It's now June, but we're still technically in a season of the year called Kuzen season, or the season of Azaka, our spirit of agriculture and growth. Zaka comes from a nation that gets referred to as Nation Juba. This is one of those bizarre points where Nation Juba as Juba doesn't really have as strong a connection to West Africa as the other nations, because Juba is largely the spirits of the Taino native inhabitants of Hispaniola, the island, from pre-colonialization. They show up as Haitian farmers now, but like if you look at Dominican Vodou, these same spirits are involved in a bubble they call agua dulces, or the sweet waters. And it's largely their indios. It's where the native spirits went. But Kuzen, in the classic understanding of the order in which spirits are called, it's a set system called règlement, the rules. Kuzen largely gets served Rada style at the end of the Rada group before the Nago spirits of Nigeria. But you can move him to a later point in the night if you want a different response. When houses do Fête Kuzen, or they celebrate him, his ritual, we still have to sing for everybody in order. But we can put him later in the night, because the more hotter and hotter and hotter spirits that we sing to before him, the more energy there is in the space. So when he arrives, we've given like this ability for the snowball to roll downhill and become the avalanche that we need it.
Gotcha.
So those little bubbles, or so many of the individual nations are mobile. We can plunk them into different spots in the règlement based on the response that we need.
Okay.
That's one of those reasons why it's like, this takes a lifetime to learn, because there's so many little loopholes and folds and intricacies. Like, I love studying modern mathematics as a religious practitioner of this tradition, because the more that they get into multidimensional spaces and the folding of how the atomic layers work, it's like, well, that's actually the same way that the folding of our envelopes of spirits work.
And we're not just talking about like, you know, like the I suppose it would be closer to like, there's a main spirit and then all the spirits behind that one, like in a court, like
Well,
Venezuela and
there's
Venezuela, they have their own courts, right?
but there's two ways to look at that. So, like, let's use Legba as an example. The modern internet, the modern world of all this stuff, unfortunately, American Horror Story with their Legba.
Yeah.
People tend to think of Legba as a single spirit, as like this deity that controls the crossroads. That's what you're going to see online. Legba at the crossroads. Thing is, the Legbas have nothing whatsoever to do with the crossroads. There is no Legba singular. Every one of these envelopes of spirits has to have a spirit that comes first within that division, whose task is to open the door to let the other ones into our world. That's Legba's function. But each of these individual bubbles has their own Legba. Similar to when we were saying Diana of Ephesus and Diana Nemorensis are not the same Diana, the Legba that opens the doorway at the beginning of the Rada rites is not the same Legba who opens the door for the Petro spirits. There's different iconography. There's different saint pictures they like to wear like clothes. They're different folks. Similarly, the other side of that, when you were talking about courts, or you might think of like almost like the modern English entourage, using Erzeli Freda as an example. Most people online are going to focus on her flirting and her relationships with men, and everywhere you're going to see Freda doesn't like to work with women as a stereotype. Freda has an entire network of spirits that travel with her as an entourage, that in her case, they're all women and they're all domestics. Lovana does the laundry and the washing. Clemezine sweeps. Philomene, like all of these spirits that she brings with her. You could look at it as well. The wealthy woman that's the kept mistress of wealthy men takes the things that they give her for being beautiful, cashes that shit in at the pawn shop, and with that money employs an entire group of women who would not have any other work were it not for her. You can't tell me the spirit hates women when she loves them and keeps a group of them alive. That's what we might consider an esco. The spirits that travel with a particular loa that go with them, just everywhere. Every major name has their own esco. So like, everyone knows Agwe. Well, the spirits that travel with Agwe are literally seen as being folks on his boat. Who are the the crew of his ship? Who goes with him? There's an Ogu Balenjo. Sometimes Freda, Agwe is one of her partners. Laseren, Agwe's wife. Like, all of those beings that travel with the name are seen as their esco. Whether they're at the same footing in hierarchy or whether these other spirits are subservient to or work for the big name. So we've got two different divisions. We've got the idea of there's many, many more names than you think, like the Legbas. And even when I say like Freda's Esco, there's a lot of different Fredas. But the mythology oversimplifies a little bit to imply the spirits that travel with her being those domestics.
Gotcha. Going back to Freda, where does that misconception that Freda does not like working with women come from? Is that more of an internet thing or just something that was misunderstood?
Freda, there's part of it goes to a lot of misunderstandings, some of which I think came from the academic texts of folks studying us, and some came from, unfortunately, in the world, there's also a lot of folks that'll take some things they've read about Vodou, take some things that they've learned about Lukumi and Isheshe, like the Orisha traditions, throw them together to hide that they know nothing. And they'll steal a lot of the stories that actually belong to a being called Oshun and blame Freda or say that it was her. Freda is, at core, humanity's ability to dream of perfection and idealize the world. Out of that comes the misinterpretation that she's got stuff to do with love and romance. Because people, when they first start dating someone, we've got our visions of our white picket fence, our 2.8 kids, our dog. That's Freda. She's showing you how good stuff could be. But it's the same thing when you move to a new city or start a new job or go to a new college. There are those visions of how ideal, how perfect could things get. Freda's all of that. But people latch on to the love thing because love feels good and sex feels great. So that's what they see. And her symbol looks like a heart. Well, there's a lot of spirits who take a heart as a symbol. She's not the only one. But because she shows up as that light-skinned mulatto elite woman of the demi-monde, she was a mistress. She was at the balls, and her husbands, the men on her elbow, well, they've got wives at home. She's the courtesan. A lot of that also leads to that love idea. When people see Freda in possession, many times what she's doing is flitting from man to man. And I give little finger shakes, like greeting people by being delicate and being perfect and being a courtesan. But they're not paying attention to how she talks to the women. There's a lot behind the scenes that you might not see when all you're seeing is this woman flit from man to man and flirt around the room.
Mm-hmm.
But people make assumptions. Again, just like lumping everything together as native, they lump everything together as, well, look at how she's behaving to the men. Obviously, she doesn't like women. The truth couldn't be further from that. Or it couldn't be further from the truth. She loves women. She loves people. She loves everybody. But just because you see her in one moment when she's on stage, you can't see what's happening behind the curtain. That doesn't imply that she doesn't exist behind the curtain. It's just that you can't see it.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm. Going back to one of the things that you said too, that the Legba is not the actual Crossroads spirit. So who is the Crossroads
Kalfu
spirit?
is.
Okay.
Yeah. So one of the things people forget, this is where we get complicated. They like to envision and oversimplify the point at which the spirit world and the human world meet as a crossroads. It is, I guess, but it's not in Vodou. Likewise, people will think that, like, well, Legba is the first spirit that all Vodou people have to talk to because he's that crossroads. He's not. In a formal fete, we talk to a spirit called Untor first. He's the drums. West African languages are tonal in a way that our languages are not, but the drumheads can speak a tonal language. Untor translates our speech to spirit speak. Then we call into being a spirit called Grand Chemin, the Great Road, because we're literally opening the road between our world and the spirits. Then we get to Legba. We open a door on that road to let the spirits in. It's a gate, not a crossroads. His songs even say things like Legba Nanbayea, Legba at the gate. They never say Legba Nan Kalfu, Legba in the crossroads, because Kalfu's a different guy. Remember earlier when I was talking a little bit in terms of element, and I said that largely Rada spirits are water and air, but Petor are fire.
Yeah.
Part of that's also largely the Rada spirits are seen as traveling a single major road. But the spirits that come with this wholly different rite and protocol and attitude and energy are a different road. That's the crossroads. When we get to that point in the Petor rites, we call another spirit named Kalfu. His name comes sort of like carré, square, carré-fou, square of four, French for literally a crossroads. Carré-fou becomes Kalfu in the same way that Alada, the city, became Rada. When we say Kalfu, it's his name, but it's also his title. It's literally, we are using the word crossroads to talk about this spirit. Comes to us from a completely different part of the world also. If you look at coastal West Africa, what we call Legba, it's not what the Cubans call Elegua. Elegua is a praise name meaning the handsome one for a group of spirits called the Eshus. Eshus are the crossroads. Elegba, Elegua, those are praise names for a complex. But there's a little cultural bleed over in that part of Benin, and Elegba becomes Legba for us. Different evolution, different guy, not the crossroads like the Eshus and the Elegwas, but a doorway and doorkeeper. And also not a single spirit. There's a group of them because each envelope has their own bubble, like their own doorway. A sort of cheat sheet when you're looking at saint images that are given as like clothes that Haitian spirits can wear. If the spirit picture, the saint is holding a staff or crutches, you can use that image to represent a different legba. Kalfu, the crossroads, it's a very different energy. It's a very different way of thinking because it's where two separate roads meet, the road of the Rada and the road of the Betul. Not where the road meets our world through the door that these spirits come to us from. Does that make any sense? Again, unfortunately, it's really windy because it's really complicated.
Well,
but I mean, it's one of those, like, when you see folks online that are talking about, like, I went to the crossroads to talk to Legba, the rest of us are quiet, like, no, you didn't. Honey, I have no idea what you did, but what you're representing has nothing to do with what you say it is because you're a fraud. We don't really say that because our tradition really prizes subtlety. It's not my job to go out there and point my finger at everybody and say, fake, because that just creates drama. But I can quietly educate in the background and say, when you're looking at someone that says, oh, I went to the crossroads to talk to Legba, now pay me for what I did to you. That person's not talking to Legba. I have no idea what they're talking at, but it's not, like, they misrepresent the details in a way that if you've got the eyes to see it, you can know that what they're talking about is BS. Does that make, like, I mean...
It does. It really does.
That was my outside my head voice speaking. Like, I forget sometimes. It makes me angry because it's like these people are basically running onto the altar to say that they can give a better Eucharist than the bishop can. It's abusing a religion that's got an actual priesthood that's trained. But how can we educate the public to know what they're looking at, have the discernment to say, oh yeah, that person's giving out things that aren't really the religion they say they are. Why? Elekes are a Nigerian bead system that Vodou did not inherit. So when you see someone selling elekes for the Loa, we don't have that. It's a thing that's not real. When you see people using the word Loa, Creole's not the best written language. It used to get written French style. Like O-U-I is pronounced like W-I. It's the word oui, yes. A French alphabet and French orthography writes it with an O. Loi. French orthography wrote it with an O because French speakers knew what that sounded like. Americans, when they read L-O-A, if they want to read it English style, they're going to accidentally read it as Loa. That tells you it's someone that's never actually been in ceremony or never really talked to Haitians, because then they'd know what the word sounds like no matter what it's written as. But, well, there's also a reason why nowadays Creole as a language is trying to use an English spelling instead of the older French. Books that were written in the 40s, you will see L-O-A. Books that are written now, you will see L-W-A. It's a part of decolonialization patterning to try to use the dominant language of the hemisphere, as opposed to the French that still basically owe Haiti millions of dollars, rather than empowering the French in that way to continue using their spelling. Creole language speakers are changing the way their language is written. But when you hear practitioners online or on video or whatever talk about, well, I serve the Loa, you know that they don't. They're reading from a book.
Gotcha. Yeah, so actually, I wanted to actually talk about this too, because, one of my favorite subject classes are demons and devils. When I first was introduced to voodoo, and, I was reading stuff online because I didn't know any better. One of the bigger misconceptions, at least when it comes to Kafu, is that they call him the devil, or he's supposed to be the devil figure in voodoo. Is that true?
When you think of someone as a devil, I think sort of our Christianized common culture mythology tends to think of the devil as out to get you.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with that idea, when you try to imply that for a spirit, is these are spirits that have been chosen to be served by a community and carried with them over time and generations. No community is really going to carry a spirit that's out to kill you or out to get you or doom you or damn you. Because just like we don't talk to other spirits, we really just talk to ours. Why would I feed the one that's out to hurt me? So the appellation of sort of thinking of a loa as a devil in the first place, or as a demon, or as harmful, if they were out to hurt us, we wouldn't be giving them food. We would be banishing them and be like, you, out of the sandbox. We don't play with you anymore. So just because of that, I would never think of any of our spirits as devil-like, because that implies they're just there to screw you over, or be like the mythical genie that you asked for the details just the wrong way. Now I've got your soul. Yeah, none of those would get further empowerment from us. Instead, these spirits protect us from beings like that. So I can't really say that I would think of him as a devil. Now, Kalfu is hot. He's very much a spirit of fire and of the night. The crossroads is a dangerous place. Kalfu's the one that keeps us safe in it, but there's danger inherent. So some people do use devil imagery. But they're looking at a red guy lit in flames, and this is a hot spirit of fire. So it's not that they're worshiping a devil any more than using the image of St. Patrick, because it's an older white guy with a beard and rich, expensive robes with snakes coming out of the bottom of it. St. Patrick is not actually Damballa, but Damballa likes to wear the picture because it's the one that makes sense. Kalfu sometimes likes to wear the picture of the devils because they're hot, they're flamey. Most of us instead actually use either the image of St. Andrew with the diagonal cross or the image of Christ up on the cross called the Just Judge. Sometimes St. Peter because he's holding crossed keys, sign of the crossroads, but we're not as likely to use satanic imagery to represent this being because there's no real similarity other than he's hot and fiery. It's kind of a hot button topic also. Evangelical Christianity and the inroads into Haiti that it's attempting to make. Evangelical Christianity, first off, ignores the teachings of the very thing that they say they worship. You're supposed to welcome your neighbors, love thy neighbor, turn the other cheek, welcome people, welcome them in, not hate them. But that's its own story. Evangelical Christianity, with the inroads that American money has been allowing it to make into Haiti, does not like people believing or practicing in ways that it does not control. Evangelical Christianity is known for looking at any other world religion and saying all of its beings are demons and devils. We need to exorcise them. We need to get rid of them. That's creating a really abusive environment in Haiti with the ancestral religions that people have always had. Because now you've got the evangelicals looking at literally your next door neighbor saying, well, you have to hurt them or save them from burning in hell because they worship in a way that's other than you do. It's ugly. But devil as a word also tends to be something that we're really sensitive about because these evangelicals come in knowing nothing about us, insisting that just because we worship differently than they do, that we must be satanic, and all of our spirits are really the devil. When most of these spirits predate the concept of the devil that comes from a region in the Middle East that's technically a couple thousand years younger than many of the kingdoms that our spirits come from. Like, we predate you, baby. I'm sorry, but that means you can't use your symbolism to explain us. Any more than you could use a fast food burger to explain what Cordon Bleu is teaching of French food. So, devil, I get a little antsy. Like, I don't like the idea of mixing that word because I hope those evangelicals never listen to something that I said and think that they've got leverage over us for their stupidity. However, there's another classification of spirit that's not loa, Lua implies that these spirits have been civilized, taught to work with people. But remember, I said sometimes they're spirits of natural forces. One could be the spirit of a big rock or a waterfall or a field or a storm. Well, what happens when someone's interacting with a spirit that has not been civilized by generations of being worked with? Just because these Lua have been worked with us for years does not mean they're the only spirits out there. There is a classification of spirit that we like to call Jab, D-J-A-B. Jab are not Lua. Jab can become Lua over generations in time. Erzeli Dantor, her songs still talk about her having been a Jab. She was one of them. But Jab are hot. They're not civilized. They don't really like people because they've never had to interact with them much. But the word Jab comes to us from the French word literally for devil. I guess much like a rough little creature when found in a South Pacific island was called a Tasmanian devil. Doesn't imply that they literally broke their way out of hell to scratch your eyes out. They're kind of cute. They're just a rough little beastie that doesn't like being touched. So Jab also don't really like being touched. They can be rough, they can be dangerous, they can be inherently perilous to interact with. But that doesn't make them satanic. That just means that they're untamed. You can pick up and pat your house cat. Your house cat is domesticated, it's been civilized. Do try not to do that with the panther you might come across in your forest walk. They might like a scratch under the chin. They might take your chin off. That's like Jab. They're natural. They're not evil. They just don't really like people. That's the closest we really get to the concept of devil, is really just that word overlap.
So it's just pretty much like a wild spirit then.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Okay. But all of these spirits were wild spirits once. But somebody figured out how to work with them. Somebody taught their kids, hey, you know, this spirit protects me. This spirit will protect you. Give them this the way I do. Over time, that's going to evolve. Over generations and intermarriage, and cross-cultural conflicts and contact, that spirit that was so-and-so's pet way ages ago instead becomes a major spirit of an entire community. It has taught the community, if you want my response, this is how you call my name. And that community has access to that bubble. Likewise, that community has taught that spirit, hey, if you want us to continue giving you food, don't eat my kids. Protect me from that tribe over there. My son's going to war. Make sure he comes home in one piece. All of those things. The spirit became empowered to do so and taught how to do so. But the spirit also taught its people protocols for, if you want to call me, this is what you do. This is my name. You want this response? Call me this way. Now, this is going to, especially because you mentioned ceremonial stuff and working with demons. Well, where's the word come from for us? Well, it comes from the Greek. It comes from Middle Eastern languages where it used to be D-A-E-M-O-N, which would define a particular type of natural spirit. If we look back at our history, this is where things get really fun. When we're talking about Goetia as a tradition, or when we're talking about the grimoire traditions that stem from what's now Israel and Palestine, we're looking at the other side of the African continent. We're looking at lands that now have a big-ass desert in between. But according to archaeology, we're looking at a desert that's only about 3,600 years old. The Sahara, as its current extent, was not always impassable. A mere 4,000 years ago, it was fairly easy to cross through kingdoms that existed there to go from West Africa to East Africa. So nowadays, when we look at traditions that are West African, spirits of air and fire, drums, call and response songs, possession, and you compare to East African traditions like Za'ar, an Islamic tradition that works with jinn, that are spirits of air and fire, that are called with drums and call and response singing and possession. There are extant traditions on the Islamic side in East Africa that are almost identical to the Christianized and Islamicized traditions of West Africa. because at one point in time their peoples had contact. If we look to when the grimoires were begun, that which the word daimon represented was a spirit of air and fire that largely was called with drums and call and response singing. And the Goetia codifies a type of spirit that some would call jinn, some would call loa, some would call orisha, and some would call demon. We're looking at the same roots, but different evolutions.
But because of this particular evolution, they'd be considered separate spirits, though, right?
Right. Just like my earlier example when I was saying the Ogun that's in Nigeria is now my Ogu that I can sing up as a Haitian Vodou practitioner is not, I don't have rights in Nigeria. It evolved differently. That split has only been through the colonial period. The split from the Goetia traditions in Zaar in East Africa is thousands of years of desertification of the Sahara. So things have evolved even more differently. As the Goetia idea diasporized through the Jewish population into Europe and the ceremonial orders, or even like when we look at Kabbalah and the folks that were really from within the Jewish tradition writing things down in like the 11 through 1300s AD, we've got further diasporization of the same kind of ideas in radically different evolutionary paths. Their communities carried their spirits into different ways. So again, I'm not talking about transliteratability because we can't do it any more than that linguistic example of what, well, no one speaks Latin anymore. Sorry, Dan Quayle, you can't go to Latin America. Like, the languages have evolved to be their own distinct tongues. With regional variants, we might say Italian. Each of those regions has their own dialect that aren't really even understandable from one to one. The spiritualities are the same. You could think of Haitian Vodou as a network of dialects. You could think of what you would consider demons as, yeah, thousands of years ago, they might have been the same spirit. But now you've gone through Latin became Italian, became this one dialect that's found in a specific town in Sardinia versus a Portuguese that became the dialect of one specific Azore Island's native inhabitants. They both came from the same language once, but now that the family in the Azores and the family in Sardinia have nothing in common. So the demons that you know of is like this particular like clipothic way of working versus a Haitian practitioner's loa. There's so little in common these days, it's not funny. One does not give license to the other.
Mm-hmm.
See what I mean?
Yeah,
that was a really, really windy and long way to explain that, but I'm sorry. It's really the only way. It's like you got to look all the way back through the past to see how these things differentiated on that tree where they became different branches.
No, definitely no. And that's really important too, to just, look up the history as to where these things come from, right?
Well, it's when you get to ancestral traditions like ours, when you get to things that are inherited, indoctrinated, adopted, you become part of the family with this initiation. It really drums home that idea of we stand on the shoulders of giants, our ancestors that elevated us and the people that came before us that suffered and died to give us what we have are worthy of respect, and part of that respect is education. Looking back into the past and learning our past informs how we became what we are in such an important and incredibly valid way.
Definitely.
It's why I giggle sometimes when you've got especially the States are a little different than Canada. You guys, I think Canadians are certainly more civilized and much more respectful. But there's a thing in our culture where we like to belittle that which we are not. So it's very common that ceremonialists from within ceremonial magic or orders, especially those that are Goetic in origin, will look down on the things that are African in origin as though, well, that's what slaves did. With a clear misunderstanding that it's like the very spirits that empower your tradition were once the same as the spirits that we maintain. They have evolved in different directions. But for one group to look down at the other and belittle them as what people of color did is such a deep insult to their own powers, not even ours, that it kind of stuns me. I think there's a unfortunate history, like when you look at the folks, especially the Golden Dawn writers, as much as I love Violet Firth, Dion Fortune, she tended to promulgate this idea of her order's yoga of the West was a way to take an energetic idea for her race and make it better than the others. Or, well, since your race has this tool, you don't need to worry about what other races are doing. Insert colonial British racism into the rest of the world in the way that only the British could do. And what you end up with is, well, the yoga of the West and our ceremonial tradition is inherently better than the people who are not our peers. That racism pollutes the modern magical scene so deeply into either that example I talked about before, where everyone's going to respect the Catholic priest at Mass, but not respect us, or the idea that, well, I'm so elevated in my grimoire tradition that I look down on you because the people who carried your tradition were black. It's really ugly. It's really ugly. And it's like so much beauty gets lost because these people don't want to see it. So much history gets lost because they can't fathom that their own people might have been wrong.
But you also have to include the generational, indoctrination of those particular religions too, right?
Absolutely. Products of time. I mean, you can't, like, again, I'm unfamiliar with Canadian politics the way that I am with American, but American politics tends to idealize our founding fathers, who were all slave owners, who were horrible people. Thomas Jefferson, who wrote so much of our country, had a history of raping his slave and producing children that he then sold off. These are despicable people who were upstanding members of their time and products of their time. Just because we understand things differently now does not absolve them in our eyes, but it also doesn't make them the most evil people in the world because they were doing what they were taught to. Where I find the problem, where I talk about sort of the racism inherent in magical systems now, is if we're going to move past colonialism, if we're going to say, I am egalitarian enough to share or to fight for the rights of people of color, well, then I should also probably fight for their traditions, shouldn't I? Or the ones that were carried by them historically before, well, colonialization wiped their stuff away. There's a lot of nuance and a lot of layers to it. Just because someone's in a ceremonial, if someone's in a European ceremonial order, it does not make them inherently racist. I'm not going to look down on them and be like, well, you're a shitty person. But I want them to be open to question why they would look down on a tradition that would have someone like me in it. Why would the spirit call to someone like me? Why would the spirit let me in? Why would these spirits empower someone who looks like me? There's a lot of nuance there.
Definitely.
But I think out of that, you also, like, there's the tendency toward belittling what they don't understand of races that they see as beneath them. And that evolved into this sort of open source voodoo idea of, like, Sister Rainbow Moonbeam who thinks she works with Freda because she saw a rainbow once. Like, that boiling down of the new ageification of these ideas creates a lot of problems for all of us, not just the folks that think that they can speak for voices that they've never bothered to ask an opinion of.
Exactly.
Like, it's not easy. I mean, I stand to represent, it's a tradition with an open door. Like, we like to use the words closed systems a lot in magical traditions. Oh, that's a closed system, you can't talk about it. Well, closed traditions have to have a way of transmitting themselves into the future. And they do. They have, some of them have initiations, like mine. Some have genetic transmission. You got to be born into it. But For those that have initiations where outsiders can be brought in to become the new in crowd, there's an open door that you can knock on, respectfully ask to be let in, and be let in. The appropriators, like if you're going to try to steal something through the window instead of actually approaching the door, anyone's welcome if you want to do the work to become part of the in-group. With a tradition like mine, it involves learning at least 2 foreign languages. You have to be able to speak this, like the songs. You have to be able to understand the words, sing the words. You can't translate the liturgy into a language that the spirits aren't familiar with. Like, you got to become part of the tradition if you want to do it. Sister Rainbow Moonbeam does not have time. It would get in between her yoga class, her hair pressing, and the no foam latte she's screaming at a barista about. She'd have to take the time to learn French, to learn Creole, to learn folk ways of people that are not inherently hers to command. When you couple that with a racist or a colonial attitude of these people are beneath you anyway, it leads to the idea of, well, I can just take what they have. But when you read what these people write, none of it's accurate because they don't, they're only writing about what they think they see.
Well,
again,
no
really,
there.
really windy explanation.
No lies there.
No lies. But the thing is, like, it's not simple. It's not, oh, great Freda in the sky is a Barbie doll that gives you stuff if you ask her the right way. No. But there's also no single Freda. There's a bunch. There's a network. There's a reason why. Like, if all you see is some book, God knows how many numbers are on the cover of spells that say, do this spell with Freda and she'll give you blah. We don't do that. It's abuse on our culture. I don't care if your spell works or not. It's not Freda you reached. So this whole idea of putting it online of like, well, I work with so-and-so. No, you don't. You work with something that is consuming your energy as long as you're doing what it thinks you want to hear. But without access to the vibe, without knowing what frequency to tune that dial to, or without having the keys that unlock the ability to work with that name, that spirit has no reason to understand you, respond to your call. Like, this notion that people think that they're special enough to be better than a tradition that actually has extant priesthoods, it's ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, you did say that the door exists for voodoo.
If people walk up to it correctly. Like, find a lineage, find a house. We're not hidden, we're not secret. We do fetes, we do spiritual feedings, we do treatments. We're out there to be able to give readings. Yeah, make sure that the person that you're going to is who they say they are. Ask around. But like, go to events, become part of the community, learn the language, learn how to talk to people in that community. Do the time. Eventually, if you find a lineage that you like, and it's like, okay, I like these events, they're respectful of their spirits, they really host events, they're not just cranking out people or threatening them with like, you have to initiate or die. Fraud takes a lot of forms. But like, if you feel like you're in the right spot and it starts feeling like, this is my family, I love these people, then initiation can be something that can be talked about because it seals the deal. It makes you family. Mm-hmm. That's in stark contrast to a lot of folks that game the system. Ours is a priesthood that, I mean, it costs money for initiation ceremonies. There are a lot of folks that'll use that idea to say like, well, I gave you your first reading. The spirits say you're supposed to be in initiation. So now you have to call me mommy. Let's look at your calendar. Let's book your initiation. When can you fly to Haiti? And it's like, all of this stuff is being done to a stranger. There's no connection. There's no heart to heart there yet. That's not real. Likewise, there's a lot of lineages that there's sort of a human psychology principle that says we give value to that which we pay for. People can take advantage of that. If you come to a lineage and you're told you must have lave-tete, everyone that wants to do this must go through an initiation ceremony that costs a couple $1,000s to be a member. What they're actually doing is hazing you like you're entering a fraternity. They know that once you've paid for something that you don't know about, because this is your first exposure to a foreign culture, if you don't know what to look for, but you pay for ceremony, everything that comes out of these people's mouths will then later be given greater weight by your brain because you parted with money to get access to it. Basic human psychology. And it's actually abuse. Those lineages force everyone to part with money to get access to simple questions because you're more likely to listen to lies when you've paid for money or when you've paid money.
Mm.
There's a lot of that out there. But that's why I'm always like, no, take the time. Do the work. Invest in getting to know people. Not just in ritual. Get to know them outside of it. If someone's constantly pressuring you into doing something, it's no different from someone asking for non-consensual sex. If they can't take no, they can't take no. And spiritual rape is a thing. Give it time. Build into ceremony. Build into initiation. Because otherwise, if they're taking advantage of you, what they're actually doing is non-consensual and they really did rape you. People don't think of those terms, but that's what happens. And when you're, especially when you're someone like me, where a lot of the folks that come to talk to me in my aegis as a priest are coming out of spiritual abuse. It's literally that my job becomes helping rape victims to heal. There's a lot of that in those streets. My lineage is not necessarily the best. None of that is come to me because we're inherently better than everyone else. But we're just a lineage that doesn't put up with that shit. I don't know of others that I could recommend. That does not imply that they're not out there. Like, none of that's a sales pitch to be like, oh, we're the good guys. It just means there's a lot of bad guys out there. Be discerning. But the front door has to be open because people have to be able to be initiated. Find the right place, you find a good home. Find the wrong place, and they're using the right home's iconography to misrepresent themselves.
Mm.
I suppose it's like, and again, our initiations, they bind you into the family. They bind you into the family of these spirits as well. Like that ritual introduction is you can't be uninitiated. So it would kind of be like marrying somebody that you've literally never met. If you want a happy husband or a happy wife or whatever orientation your relationship becomes, your partner comes with their family, comes with their drama, comes with their job, comes with their schedule, all sorts of stuff. Courtship, engagement, marriage, and marriage begins your life together, is no different from contacting a house or a priest, going to their community events, declaring, hey, you know what? I think I want to become part of this family. I'm investing my time. And then initiation. That initiation is the marriage. Don't do it to a stranger. Don't do it to someone whose family you hate, because it's the rest of your life. Then your post-initiation priesthood is your marriage and learning how to make a successful family.
Mm-hmm.
These web people that want you to be like, well, Legba at the crossroads says you have to give me your money and become my child now. Don't want people to know that.
Oh, goodness. Well, I mean, how else were they going to make money?
Bingo. Sell Mary Kay like the rest of us. Make your cash through something legal, friendly, and ethical. Oy.
Now, that would be a horror for, like, one of the African diasporic religions to become MLM.
Well, no, but those people basically make it that way. They want to con people into giving them their money and thinking, well, you're a priest now, you're just like me, but they never teach their downline how to be as what they are. I mean, again, I can really only speak from the example of my lineage because it's what I'm part of, but my initiatory mother is very clear about, if we look good, she looks good. If my priesthood, what I'm doing for the community that I'm building, makes my mambo look respectful, like she taught me well, all of us look good. The tradition looks good. The light, like the whole thing. If we're in an environment where it becomes a cult of personality, and one person makes a whole bunch of underlings that are their numbers and their drama, and look at my people. Well, what happens if that figurehead gets knocked out or incapacitated? If there's no one who can take the reins, if there's no one who can keep the machinery running, the whole thing falls apart. And we see it over and over and over again, that the figurehead in control has a stroke and loses capacity, dies, goes into alcoholism, goes into withdrawals, has cancer, whatever their reasons. There's so many right now. The machinery falls apart. They leave a legacy of injured people who can no longer get what they need because none of them were taught to provide it. One of the reasons I love my lineage and my own bias in loving my mambo is she teaches us to be self-sufficient. She's said publicly many times, her ultimate dream is to be able to go to a fete, go to a ritual, go to a something that her children are performing, that they're putting on for the community, that she doesn't have to do any work for. She can just sit down and enjoy and dance and sing and not have to worry about it because she knows that the community's in good hands. That's how we're taught. So that's another hallmark. If you're looking at something that becomes a cult of personality where only one person is allowed to be in charge, you got a serious problem on your hands. If in their rights, only one person is allowed to embody possessing spirits, you got a problem on your hands. Because they're only showing what they want you to see. They're not showing the nitty gritty of a community that loves each other and works and does its thing. There's a lot of those, like I refer to them sometimes as Kanzo mills, like puppy mills, where they don't even hold ceremonies. They don't hold parties. All they do is browbeat people into parting with money to get initiated into whatever. You're not getting taught. You're not getting anything. Even for folks, like there's secret, not even secrets. Secrets are weird. It's a hard word because nothing's really secret outside of the initiation chamber. It is a commonality through most of the Kanzo adjacent lineages of Vodou that there's a piece of things, something called a collier, a big collar of beads that we wear when we come out of the initiation. It's keyed to and fed to empower your spirits. Its power fades with time. A lot of these puppy mill initiation groups, or folks even that don't even look like that, their initiates are not told that collier has to be fed on a semi-regular basis at least once every 7 years, minimum. Because the heat that your initiation gives you cools down with time. There are people that think that they've been initiated for 10, 12 years where they're still not really taught to do much, but they were also never taught that collier needs to be fed. Now they basically have nothing left because they were not told these are ways to keep yourself and your spirits heated and alive and moving. There's requirements. If you're not given the requirements, it means your family literally doesn't love you. That's a problem. But that's that spiritual abuse. And I don't like thinking of anything as rape. Like is the wrong word. But those forms of spiritual abuse, when those people go into an environment without the information that could give them true consent, it is a form of rape. They are being held over a barrel without consent.
Okay. But before we delve into any more, we've kind of gone over, but I'm just wondering, did you...
Sorry, I told you my things are windy. Like,
no, it's okay. It's fine.
There's a concept that explains how I think, how I teach, and how I talk. And it's called Lies to Children. I know this through two authors, Terry Pratchett and Jack Kirby. They wrote a series of science books, but they use the idea of lies to children as how our education system actually functions. When you are entering grade school, like if we're looking at biology, first they teach you that the organs in your body are the smallest parts of you. You got your lungs, your kidneys, your hearts, your livers, your eyes. The year afterwards, you actually find out that your teacher before lied to you. The organs are not the smallest parts. The cells are. But then after that, well, the cells are made of little organelles. Then we find out that there's molecules and there's chemicals, and the way that the covalent bonds keep organic chemistry going that create the materials that cells are made from. Each of these specific examples, when you're taught the next layer, you're actually taught that what you thought you were taught before was lies. I try not to teach that way. I don't want to be accused of lying about my tradition. So I throw people kind of into the deep end. Let's begin in first grade with the organic chemistry that tells you what a calcium gate is that allows this nerve signal to function. My job is not to lie to you and say, today we're going to say your lungs are as deep as you need to know. My teaching style is, if I'm going to actually give you the information, I'm going to give it to you for real, double-barreled, no gloves. Unfortunately, that does tend to mean that my explanations go over time.
That's totally fine. But I mean, there's a lot to talk about. But I mean, there's other subjects too that came up during the interview. But I mean, like we can just go deep diving later on. But I mean, but there's lots to talk about despite that. But yeah, so before we sign off, did you want to reintroduce yourselves again to the new viewers coming on, who you are, what you do, and where they can find you?
In case you've been wondering who this crazy fool is who won't shut up, my name is Matt. Houngan Matt on Facebook. I am Bozanfe, Bonungan. That is Bozanfe. F as in Frank. I believe on Facebook I am the only person with that name, so it makes me very easy to find. My website is darklady.net. It's the name of my business here in Southern Louisiana. I do have a teaching blog that is part of that website. And I am a very proud initiate of a traditionalist Haitian Vodou society called Société Nago, led by Antiolabomambo in Boston and Jacmel, Haiti. And I have had my ass on now for 13 years.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what to say about me else, because that's just going to open another door that's like,
oh no, I know. But yeah, so thank you all for coming to this episode of Cracking Open with a Cold One. Thank you, Houngan Matt, for coming on. Honored to have you. And thank you
but I mean, with those links and things, if there are audience members that have questions that were not like either immediately answered by what I said, or if there's some dissonance between like, hey, I thought something was this way, but Matt says it's this way, what's going on? Please send me a Facebook friend request. Like, it's a very easy way to get a hold of me. I'm not one of those people that charges money for like a simple question. If you want to talk to me, that's free, that's friendly. I like friends. But if people have questions, Bozanfe Bonungan is how you find me on Facebook. If they have access to your, or you can, if there's a way to like where this goes on there on the live, can you put like a thing with my, you can tag me in it so they can click on me.
yeah. I can do
but
that.
Folks can feel free to approach me. I'm not on any pedestal. I'm not scary. And there's no such thing as a stupid question.
Mm-hmm. Well, there you have it, folks. Great resource to access. And, you know, when he's available, he can definitely answer any of your questions about voodoo. But yes, thank you all for coming. And thank you once again, Matt. And everyone, thank you for your love and support. Be blessed, and good evening to everybody.